Hello and welcome everyone to Pause and Pivot, our Cafecito Chat space where we explore the science and soul of meaningful living through books, reflection, and shared conversation. I'm Margarita V, happy to be here with our host who we'll introduce in a moment. And this month, we've been exploring the theme of mental health matters and mental fitness is how we sustain it. So throughout this month, we've really been looking at what it means to stay grounded, emotionally resilient, focused, and a sense of more fully human in the modern world. We began with a brief look at The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, where we explored how technology, distraction, social media, and so much of the ways we are fragmented attention is impacting emotional well-being, relationships, and human connection. And one of the biggest takeaways from that conversation was that the growing importance of protecting our attention and learning how to stay more fully present in a distracted world. Then last week, we explored Brain Energy by Christopher Palmer. And that conversation really expanded our understanding of mental health by looking at the relationship between metabolism, stress, sleep, nutrition, energy regulation, and overall brain function. And one of the key insights from this amazing book was his key declaration that all mental disorders are metabolic disorders. So we're recognizing that mental health is deeply connected to how we live, how we nourish ourselves, how we regulate and care for ourselves as whole human beings. And if these conversations are resonating with you, we'd love for you to like and subscribe and share these Cafecito Chats with others who might enjoy these thoughtful conversations around mental health, human flourishing, leadership, well-being, and meaningful living. And if you've missed our early discussions this month on The Anxious Generation or Brain Energy, I'd love for you to go back and watch those conversations as well, because together they really create a powerful arc around attention, emotional well-being, mental fitness, and what it means to stay fully human in the modern world. And today, that journey we're continuing with our new book, Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine. So this book really focuses on the idea that mental fitness is a trainable skill, that we can strengthen our ability to pause, focus, self-regulate, interrupt reactive patterns, and respond to life with greater awareness and intentionality. And honestly, in a world shaped by so much chronic stress, multiple ways of living distracted, with our beautiful technology and AI, these may become some of the most important human skills we can develop. And of course, one of the things I value most about these Cafecito Chats is that we bring together different perspectives, lived experiences, and our individual wisdom into these conversations of the big ideas in the books. So let's join our co-hosts. Hello, Urchana. Hello, Colin. Woo! So good to have you here. Colin, how are you?
I'm well, Maggie. How are you?
Good. So how's this discussion landing for you?
Well, as you know, I went through the PQ coach training, and I'm a big fan. It altered my perception. I have been a lifetime meditator, initiated into TM when I was 13, and the experience of PQ was profound for me because it helped me realize that what I consider to be kind of an esoteric psycho-spiritual practice is also really just a modulating mental practice, mental fitness practice, and getting that capacity to do that outside of my meditation area. That was a game changer for me. So I'm a big fan of Shirzad and his work.
I love it. Thank you so much. And that's what we do. We bring our rich lived experience. So looking forward to getting more of your shares in today's chat. And Urchana, you're joining us from the West Coast. How are you showing up today?
Great, thank you. And so inspired by Colin, what you just shared That's incredible. TM trained at 13. Wow. I'm with true practitioners here, and I am very much, I think, still in process of identifying and defining what process works for me. So I am thrilled to be introduced to Shirzad, becoming a bigger fan day by day. For myself, this month has been about for focusing on financial planning. And it just dawned on me this morning as I'm listening, to Positive Intelligence. And I've been listening to the book. And it dawned on me, I'm focusing on financial planning. What about well-being planning? And I think that's where, for me, if I've shifted in that. Where, obviously I am concerned about financial planning, but well-being planning for me is really where it's at. So that's where I am in my practice, and thrilled, by the really the potential of that planning and innovating for myself. So really incredible. Great to be here. Thank you.
I love that. I love how we reflect with each other and we gain from each other a new perspective and honoring always where we are in our individual practice. Sharing those little sparks here in this community can be that little spark that helps others to reflect themselves and then ask themselves, where am I? And where am I going? So thank you for being here. I love that so much. So with that, let's go ahead and begin with a brief overview of the book, the author, and why this conversation matters so much right now. Okay. So today we're exploring this magnificent book, Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine, why only 20% of individuals and teams achieve their true potential. And what I appreciate about this book is that it's not really about achievement alone in the traditional hustle culture sense. It's really about understanding the mind, strengthening our awareness, and learning how to live and lead with greater clarity, resilience, and intentionality. So let's jump into a book overview. This book is really about mental fitness for modern life, strengthening the mind in the midst of stress, uncertainty, and distraction. So Shirzad Chamine argues that our mind can either be working for us or against us. How is our mind showing up as a friend or foe? And in today's world, with all of the stress serving as that fuel to ignite those internal critics, how can we focus on attention, regaining that focus to increasingly decrease that fragmentation? And his focus in this book is looking at very small, simple, daily practices that can help to first strengthen awareness, which is really the top skill for our modern day living, and how we can look at developing mental fitness as part of our daily routine to support a sense of whole person flourishing. So moving away from showing up in reactive work or home environments, which can easily pull us into what Shirzad calls our survival mode or our saboteur mind frame. One thing I especially find compelling is the idea that small daily practices can gradually strengthen awareness and reshape our patterns over time. I love how this is really calling out that it's not about perfection. It's about learning the benefits and how to pause, noticing, clear seeing, non-judgmentally what's happening internally, and then respond with consciousness, with more intentionality rather than just reactive. So about the author, Shirzad Chamine is a Stanford lecturer, executive coach, and creator of the Positive Intelligence Framework, which I use as a core component of my executive and lifestyle curriculum programs. So his work combines neuroscience, positive psychology, leadership development, and performance science. And what makes his work especially relevant right now is that he focuses on practical mental fitness skills that can be used in real life, on the go, in the workplace, in the home, during stressful times, as we have those conflict situations or crucial conversations at work or in our relationships and with everyday challenges. So we want to focus that this is not for someday to learn these things on a retreat, but that this is a set of skills that we can bring to our everyday battlefield of modern life. So why does this book matter? You know, this really captures the conversation that is so timely right now about the modern mind under constant and multiple layers of pressure. Whether you're dealing with chronic stress at work, at home, or financially, how this is impacting our emotional well-being, people really are living under chronic stress. And this can really impact what he calls the survival brain to then dominate how we think, feel, and then act or react. So focusing on workplace stress, how that can fuel the way we may show up in reactive patterns, taking away productivity and quality relationships. And then looking at technology, how that leads to fragmentation of our focus and this near constant attention with the constant dings and pings. And thinking about how our inner skills are urgently needed. So this is what we will be looking at. While we want to acknowledge and use technology in beautiful new ways, we can really look at how much people spend their time switching tasks and living at what Cal Newport says, sort of superficial human routers and kind of not allowing us to really do the deep work. So we're here to focus on flourishing, well-being, and productivity. And Shirzad Chamine shares the statistic that approximately only 20% of individuals and teams achieve their true potential. So we're looking into that it's not a lack of intelligence or talent or even willpower. It's the mind working against itself through stress and reactive patterns. So for today, there's so many ideas in this book. We're going to focus on just some high-level shares of the big ideas in general around awareness, moving from lack of awareness and reactivity to sitting in the driver's seat, reestablishing a sense of self-command as we then approach and orient to those tiny steps we can take more consistently to blossom into our sage perspective. So we'll be going over ideas like the judge and the inner critic. We'll be focusing how mental fitness is now a really important part of our daily self-care and professional routine if we want to be in that self-command mode. And the importance of focused attention becoming a critical leadership skill, and how technology, while it can increase our fragmented sense of focus, can also be used for good. As we then develop our sage perspective, we step into that pause of being curious of the different pathways we can each uniquely approach our path to human flourishing. Number one, before we get to big idea number one, let's just check in. Focusing on this book, what are you most excited to dive in for positive intelligence?
Well, for me, I think it's well, you mentioned it. It's so needed right now. There, in my opinion, well, not even my opinion. Excuse me. All I have to do is read or watch the news. There's never been a time in the history of the world where there's been more information available to us, more disruption to the structures that humanity has typically relied upon for the group sense of we're okay. Political, spiritual, educational structures are just no longer trustworthy. And that's really destabilizing to a human who has depended upon those structures. And in my opinion, where it's moving to is you have to be the one. You have to be the one to maintain your own internal structure. And in my opinion, of all the things that I've studied over the years, which for the last 30 years, this has been one of my main foci of study is this very topic of how do I maintain my internal coherence while the rest of the world seems to be burning down. Or or I'm just bugged at my wife. Either one.
I love it. Thank you for that question. We always love your focus on coherence, how we really focus on the integrated. We're not here just to collect wisdom. We're here to integrate wisdom in our own unique way as we need it right now to apply it. So thank you, Colin, for that share. And Urchina, what about you? What are you most curious to dive into today?
I think for myself, it, and I love the fact that Shirzad uses circuitry. I'm at the panel box right now going, let me go take a look at everything that's messed up. What are the things that are not working in my panel? Really? Like what areas of my life really do are like just, and burned out, right? Not functioning. So I think that's really critical, it's the circuitry. And then the other, part of all this is how this attunement to, or, striving for self-command and then realizing how much part of my circuitry and the issues with my circuitry is on a human level, just I'm very comfortable transacting with people. I'm not necessarily, I've become almost, really averse to relationships. Just what does relationship mean? Relationship science. So that for me is also another, component of this, key component. So really fascinating stuff. Thank you, Shirzad. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Colin.
I love that. And so much of what he says is these are just like repeat patterns. And as adults, we get into our professions and, of course, to get to where you got to as a former producer, you were having to like make these decisions and do 10 things at once. And so being able to tap into our inner strengths, it's like we begin to develop these patterns. And how he shares is that we're constantly morphing and changing until we stop being aware in what pattern we kind of stayed in. So thank you for sharing that reflection of kind of where you're at as you're moving into a new transition in life and kind of being curious. So these are all the strengths and telltale signs of the transition from sort of the unawareness where many of us live in a mode of reactivity and where we're now opening into those other parts of our brain that hold these sage powers. So that's such a beautiful way to honor where we're at with an open and courageous heart. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and start focus in on big idea number 1. Okay, so as we were just interrupted in between sharing the slide with the phone going off and the ding here, it's just a part of reality. How often are we interrupted? How often are we distracted? So let's start with this big idea number 1, the judge and survival patterns. And basically it's about how stress and reactivity can hijack the mind. It's a foundational idea in the book that much of our stress and suffering comes not just from external events, the pain or the thing, but from the way our mind automatically interprets or reacts to that thing or what's happening. So Chamine calls the primary reactive pattern the judge, sort of like an inner critic that judges ourselves, judges other people, and judges our circumstances. So these 3 modes of operating from the saboteur operates from recognizing how stress activates the survival part of our brain and prohibits us from literally tapping into more helpful, innovative, and caring parts of the brain. So we'll get into that in a moment, but acknowledging first of our reactive patterns, how these can become deeply automatic and begin to establish repeat patterns in the way we even interpret or perceive things happening. So it's about strategies of self-perception and to recognize that once they've been established, it's hard to then recognize them again. So childhood coping strategies are wonderful and useful, and he goes into the book quite a bit about how our early childhood experiences allowed us to survive into adulthood by focusing primarily on discernment, our ability to understand and identify what was basically helpful for our development, physical survival, and more commonly, as we learned in the Anxious Generation book and Brain Energy, our survival and coping, of whether our brains became sort of formed to react to danger, to discern danger, or whether we were open to cultivate more of a discover mode in the brain. So awareness is number one. Without awareness, this weakens our ability to step into those mental loops. So one of the more powerful shifts is simply becoming aware of these patterns rather than just unconsciously being driven by them. Shirzad shares, your mind is your best friend, but it can also be your worst enemy. So I think this quote is powerful because it reminds us that the mind itself is not the enemy or the impediment. But without our awareness, it can easily pull us into fear, stress, comparison, judgment, and reactivity, all of which can put us into focusing on using the left part of the brain, what he calls the saboteur part of the brain. So this idea of the judge and survival patterns, the book really highlights how easy it is, right, for stress and those survival patterns that we've been adjusted to just quietly shape our reactions, how we form or don't form relationships, how we show up basically in daily experiences. So where do you think modern life most pulls people into reactivity or disconnection from themselves? What's coming up for you guys?
For myself, and I'm going to step into the fascinated anthropologist mode right now. For myself, from my self-awareness, I've realized that, in my childhood, I was, I think, raised in very fertile altruistic environment and soil. And as I reached adulthood, I kind of went into more autopilot and automatic reaction mode. And I think that's where, I've gone from altruism to autopilot and automatic. And that's where I am when I step into, my own awareness. And that's something that I'm working on. So, yeah, I'm grateful to Shiraz.
In my own experience, the PQ piece helped me expand it more into the what I think of as the rational understanding, to where I had some pretty big experiences that expanded my awareness through what I interpreted through meditation and other things as events beyond me. But I think what PQ helped me understand a little bit better was the actual mechanics of it. This idea that when I activate subconsciously, the biology in me begins to shut down my perception. I literally can't perceive as much information as I could when I'm in that relaxed and kind of nice PQ state. As soon as my anxiety increases, then all my input opportunities go down, and now I'm focused more on what I'm saying is happening versus what's really happening. And I think that's been one of the biggest things for me, is to say, when we are in that state of unawareness and subconsciously activate, our capacity for perception decreases, and now all of a sudden I don't have access to what's maybe really going on. I'm literally making things up about what's going on, and that's where I think that judge that Shirzad really talks about has some real power in our lives.
I agree, Colin. I think that's for myself too. My biological evolution, personal evolution, protective mode kicks in, right? I immediately go into protective mode. The shell comes up and I'm like, oh my goodness, and it's that's my go-to by default, automatically, autopilot, protect, go into protective mode. So yeah, I agree. So PQ and, stepping into that more and more, and realizing that this is going to, this is really training. This is actively training, rewiring, circuitry.
Mhm.
So, and that responsibility is both, humbling, empowering, terrifying, but, but it comes, I mean, that awareness, that acute awareness is such a gift. It really is.
Mhm. Yes, I love that. Thank you. And I was going to say back to what Colin was talking about, the noticing our thoughts and the neutrality of it. Um, Shirzad mentions that during childhood, we're able to better discern, like just things happening without immediately putting our interpretation or reactivity based on our limited experience. We don't have that. So we're just present. We're more present with what actually is. And it's when we start to adapt and learn and respond to situations or people over and over again, our brain learns, right? It wants to normalize and make things on autopilot. But the idea is, are we aware of how these repeated reactions and repeated ways of interpreting people, things, or circumstances, if those are really true or if they are somehow a negativity bias associated with it? So he says basically this is about PQ takes us to the front lines of our brain to be aware of what percentage of the time our mind is serving us, or what percentage of the time our mind is sort of whispering those little lies in our ears to try and convince us why these maladaptive ways of interpreting or seeing events or people are actually good for us. So it begins with awareness, a common theme we've been finding around these books this month. So in the book, he points to a simple way to kind of identify the ways that we are motivated and how we start to define the ways that we respond to life based on our motivation and our style to seek independence, acceptance, or security. So to learn more about this, it's a really simple way that you can see how are you motivated to be more independent, to be more accepted, or sort of security, and then the kind of style in order to satisfy your primary need for these motivations. Do you assert yourself? Do you try and earn your way into one of these modes, or do you try and avoid? So through all of his research that he's done through, again, positive psychology, neuroscience, behavior science, he's put together a pathway that we can then identify sort of a collective of what he calls the saboteurs. So to learn more about it, definitely get the book and learn more about it. And we'll post the QR code if you're curious to get your free assessment to identify sort of where you are with what he calls the 10 saboteurs. These, what he calls just mental, a collection of mental tendencies of how we can self-sabotage. So these aren't a way to define ourselves, to label ourselves. These are not us. We say saboteurs are not us, like toys are us. They're just a way to describe that we recognize these patterns and how they tend to show up in our life. All right. So let's move on to this idea, our big idea number 2, mental fitness and self-command. Basically ways to train the mind through small daily practices. In this section of the book, it gets really focused on small practical ways to really work on training the mind. Chamine introduces the idea of what he calls a PQ rep, or positive intelligence rep. Basically, these are small mental fitness practices designed to strengthen, number 1, awareness of when these saboteurs or the judge shows itself, and number 2, our choice and ability to move into higher levels of emotional regulation. So it begins with that interrupt, the awareness and then the interrupt, and building our capacity. And one thing that I really appreciate about this simple framework is that it's not asking us to think our way out of stress. Many of us are already overthinking anyway. And it really focuses to help us to reconnect to what we refer to as embodied awareness through the senses, through the body, through being more present minded. Simple things, like feeling your fingertips, like just right now, bringing your thumb and one of your fingertips together and just paying focused attention to what you're actually feeling. Maybe the ridges of the fingertips, maybe the warmth of your skin, and you might even hear the fingertips being rubbed, or you might notice the breath as you listen carefully. You might feel the sensation of your feet on the ground or your seat on the cushion, or you might be tasting your beautiful cafecito or a luxurious drink of fresh water. So these are the forms, the tiny moments that Shirzad shares and reflects as being important in that number one step to interrupt the survival brain and reconnect us to being in that present moment. And honestly, in today's world, that may be one of the most important skills we can develop, because all that stress and the technology constantly pulling us outward and into the mind. So with PQ, it reminds us that wisdom is not only cognitive, it's embodied. And we love that here in this discussion. So focusing on embodied practice, Chamine says you cannot strengthen your PQ brain through thinking alone. So again, we're moving beyond showing up as the librarians of our mind, and we're moving into that battlefield of life, the daily duties of what do we need to show up as our best self. It's such an important reminder that transformation doesn't happen only through information. Now, when there's AI and information everywhere, this is such an important realization that transformation really happens through practice. Small, tiny habits, our reflective experiences, and the consistent repetition. Sit there and think. So for you, what's one practice or habit that has personally helped you return to that sense of clarity or presence in life, especially when life gets stressful? What's coming up for you?
Well, I think it was a huge shift for me. I'd already been introduced to the idea that sensation was something that we should be focusing on from another experience. But it wasn't until PQ that I really made the connection that meditation, what I used to think of as meditation, was mostly a mental cerebral process. But what I eventually through PQ came to realize is that stillness that is sought by the practitioner. So when you're practicing meditation, you're hoping to get the space between thoughts to spread out a little bit, okay? And what I didn't understand all those years of meditation was there's a somatic experience associated with that spread out thought. And that's what PQ gave me. PQ gave me the realization that, oh, there's a somatic correlative with this practice of whether you're practicing meditation for calmness and stillness or you're doing PQ. The key is to evoke that sensation of stillness within. And that's been a game changer for me, because now that I've got that, now I assess first, how am I processing internally, not the thoughts that I'm going through in my head, which is where I used to go.
Thank you so much. More and more these days, it is that the cyclical or the iterative process of learning, applying, and then reflecting. This is the magic of this group here, is that we get to reflect with each other and share, this is what I've been working on and this is how it's working, and wow, this is how I'm seeing things differently. So as we do this more and more, we really do sort of accelerate not only our learning, but creating those next stepping stones that don't come from just our thought, thinking our way into the next steps, but literally being inspired by what is coming out from within us, from our inner wisdom. And so what I love to talk about, what I love to share is this simple idea that without awareness of the embodiment component, meaning A lot of people, especially when we're introducing these into like corporate workplaces, introducing these to, people who are really busy and dealing with really big projects and deals. So much of our culture emphasizes the seriousness of the left brain, the rationality, the I want to see it before I believe it, justify it, and hierarchical ways of coming to solutions or pathways forward. And what we're really looking at, with Chamine really brings out here, is the focus that our brain operates with two different aspects. So the left brain and right brain, and I know it's very generalized, but they're basically separated and only connected by the connective corpus callosum, but they operate very differently and they do different things. And through adulthood, to get to the levels of leadership, self-leadership, we tend to just focus on the left. And so that's rational. That's all these different ways to judge and discern and act quickly and not at all touchy-feely, creative, right? That's over here. So guess what? Just like a muscle, I'm back at the gym, lifting weights, and it's going to take some time, but right now some of it is atrophied. So similarly, we've got to do some reps. We've got to get in the gym and lift real weights, not styrofoam weights, right? It's about really lifting and doing those neural reps, the tiny 10-second reps, which he points to in the book. So get the book to learn more about what those little reps are, how simple they are, how powerful they are, with the main idea of intercepting when we are in those unhelpful modes of thought or feeling. And so why embodied? With the way that we are living now, my friends, with technology and AI and everything now is on these beautiful screens that connect us, we are tending to now live above the neck. We are prioritizing and valuing more what we're doing in our mind. But in ancient traditions, the mind was not looked at as just the brain, but that every cell in our body has a mind, has a purpose. And so when we operate only from the neck up with our thinking, he likens it to a computer that has only one serial. It's just a serial line of zeros and ones, which can be really efficient and can give us really amazing spreadsheets and all of these things. But as awesome as that is, he says, wait until you are able to tap into the mind of your full body with every single cell talking to you right now. Are we listening? And as we've learned in different books, the wisdom of the body through our gut-brain connection, and there's more and more connections in the brain and the body that are just now being shed light on through new research. So as we begin to appreciate the immense amount of wisdom that is coming to us from our body, how do we stop and check in? Pause and pivot, right? We pause as often as we can and then say, where shall I pivot? Instead of the 50%, huge pivot in the middle of the quarter or the middle of our life, we pause and pivot in micro 1% corrections and adjustments as we bring in the joy and the curiosity of knowing this is the path, our unique path. So I'm going to share a very strategic visual for this. Ready? It's the spud head. Are we showing up as a spud head? Just the head. We're just focusing with our head, and we have this tiny little body that we don't even tap into. So, and most of us don't even have our full head combined, right? Maybe we're not really good listeners, so we don't even have our ears that we're taking in, right? And we definitely don't smell because we have so many artificial smells, and we don't even pay attention to what we're smelling. And maybe we're not even feeling connected to our work, to our value, to how we're connected to others. So we're not even connected with our hands to our heart. And we do use a lot of our eyes, but what are we actually seeing? So what is our spud head looking like? So with this visual, it's really funny, but it really pulls the point to say, how many of our faculties are we bringing in that are bringing into our mind-body complex the information or the energy that is feeding our whole mind-body complex? So it's a learnable skill. And that, my friends, should give us hope. Beautiful. So let's move in now. Any other shares, any reflections or shares to add on?
I love
That was,
that. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, Urchina. Go ahead.
I was
Go ahead.
just going to say that was brilliant. That's all I was going to say. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, in my opinion, what it does is it points out exactly what happens when the amygdala activates and all those sensory inputs start shutting down. That was beautiful. That was amazing.
Thank you. I worked on that for a long time. And basically, think about this, my friends. So, this is about learning about the brain, which is just fascinating, right? So, when we are in stress, when we are in uncertainty, and how many of us are not, the brain is going to help defend us, to look for what can keep us safe. And in order to do that, it has to work on resources. So it diminishes all those things that are not necessary to keep us alive. However, we interpret that. So what happens with our brain is it narrows. So we literally narrow, we look and focus narrowly. We don't look out there because we don't care what's beyond the immediate surrounding. We just focus and narrow, and we look for the problem, what might eat us, the possible job loss, the possible blah, blah, blah. So we narrow and focus on the problem. And then the next part that we're going to look into with big idea number 3 on sage and human flourishing is we turn it upside down simply, and we begin to form our container. So we broaden and expand our perception of how we choose to perceive what's happening. We don't go immediately to judge or jumping into what he calls our saboteurs. We just pause and, first of all, bring in the curiosity. I wonder what the full story or the full truth is. And then we move from there. But can you see and feel that the brain is going to focus differently? So the different part of the brain operates when we're narrowing and focusing on problems, primarily the left brain. It prohibits us from tapping into the medial prefrontal cortex or from the sage brain. But when we turn into the sage brain, and again, get the book for more information on the brain, which is just amazing. Can you tell I love the brain? Neuroscience, it does a body good, learning about it and how it works. So really excited to dive into big idea number 3. Are we ready?
Yeah, I was just going to add before we do that, being in that survival mode, there's just this superficiality, right? And we just get accustomed to functioning on a superficial level because we've got to survive. You've got to survive the day, got to survive this hour, got to survive this meeting, this crisis, whatever is happening. And then there's just, patterns, and it's just layer upon layer of just superficiality. And I think that's where this is really about going really deep. So amazing. Can't wait.
I love that thought because it brings to mind the difference of AI and ancient intelligence and the deeper idea of what does it look like to really truly flourish as a human being. So the more computer-like or survival focused we want to be, then we're going to stay in that left brain. But if we're here to show up as more fully human, to really show up with our expanded and innovative mindset, to be able to have that emotional resilience and agility, then hold your horses, because in positive intelligence, he shows us the way. Because recognizing that if we are in that space of external focus, external rewards, focusing on the bottom line, avoiding, all those threats, we are having the left brain rule us, which is not allowing us to tap into our more creative, innovative, or collaborative aspect of our brain. So we need to work it out. We need to actually start to work out our brain as a habit. Like we brush our teeth, it's mental hygiene. So it's time, my friends, to begin to clear out, to recognize when those saboteurs start to show up. Not if, but when and how often. And then just 10-second reps throughout the day. How can we reset and step into that gap that Colin was talking about? There is that gap in that space between showing up as our best self, addressing our human potential, and how we're currently showing up And he says, without judgment, with a non-judgmental awareness, a balanced self-awareness, we can then see ourselves, step back with curiosity, and begin to name it to tame it, as they say in positive psychology. And that is the first step, to intercept, to take away the emotional charge of judging ourselves, judging others, judging circumstance. Wasted energy. We're here to optimize our energy, to put ourselves in the driver's seat. And the next step is to say, where do we go from here? Where are we directing our supercharged luxury vehicle, right? And that's where the potential is. If you want a self-directed, self-empowered and inspired way to live, this book gives us the tools. And it could be life-changing for people who have constantly suffered the same kind of mental anguish of not connecting with others, not fully feeling plugged in, and not knowing how to actually tap into your potential. It's because we're listening to the lies of the saboteurs that whisper to us why they need to still exist. But once we look behind the curtain, just like Oz, he was trying to operate our mind behind the curtain, we can now take a peek and better understand why our mind is trying to convince us to keep showing up in that self-sabotaging behavior. So it's an adventure, my friends. We really do encourage you to get this book. Again, I use it as part of my foundations program when I'm working with leaders, working with people looking to optimize their mind, body, performance, and whole person well-being. Because if we don't get this 6-inch territory dialed in, no matter what behavior change or new habits we're trying to install, we're always going to come back to either our baseline happiness set point or to the routine way in which we're reacting and responding to life. So it's really a game-changing new set of skills for modern life. All right, ready for Sage and Human Flourishing. Let's go. So as we look at big idea number 3, this idea of sage, which Shirzad Chamine shares with us as a part of human flourishing. So it's in the final section of the book where Chamine focuses on what he calls the sage perspective. And this is a mindset associated with some of these characteristics that most of us probably don't spend a lot of time developing and working on. And so these include empathy, beginning with empathy to strengthen our sense of empathy for self and understanding of others for that deeper, broader human connection. And then fueling our innovation through a sense of open-minded or growth-minded curiosity. And then looking at what fuels us inside. How are we guided in life through our values, the way in which we perceive the world? Do we have a decision matrix that helps to guide us towards more intentional action? So the sage perspective doesn't try and deny that there's pain or difficulty in life. Instead, it helps us to widen our perspective and to ask, what might this situation be bringing me or teaching me? And more importantly, how can then I choose to respond more intentionally? And I think this becomes increasingly important in this era of uncertainty, stress around the world, in our nation, and as AI is coming into every aspect of our life. Because while technology may continue advancing cognitively, human flourishing still depends on deeply human capacities. Some of these we have looked at in other books, like presence, meaning, embodiment, and conscious awareness. So these and other capacities are the ones that are most needed now, that we cannot afford to lose them. So it's time now to bring them in to our daily routines. So the reflection here is looking at your daily habits. Where are you oriented? How are you defining the future best version of yourself? What helps you access your wisest and most grounded self? So Chamine shares the sage perspective is that every outcome and circumstance can be turned into a gift and opportunity. This doesn't mean that we're going to bypass pain or pretend that challenges are easy, but it does invite us to consider how perspective, just changing our perspective, can actually help to shape our experiences in life. Discussions. What human qualities or capacities do you think are becoming even more important now for us to intentionally cultivate as we move forward?
Conscientiousness. I mean, that's, I was just looking at that slide and they're so helpful, Maggie. I love them. I was looking at the words conscious living, and I'm like, for myself, really, I'm realizing more and more, I want to um, get back to conscientious living because of variables such as time and space, with less and less time on our hands in some ways for conscientious living. We're being challenged to show up in a way that we haven't been because there's no time to process on a deeper level our daily interactions because we're too busy transacting. We just want to get from this transaction to the next transaction to the next meeting to whatever it is. But can we pause and really reflect in a contemplative and go into contemplative mode? So I think this is the other thing that Shirzad has really given me, the gift of contemplation, right? And then contemplation as a template, possibly. So really lots there to, contemplate. And so I'm really grateful again for that gift of, I truly, truly want to aspire and strive for. And for me, flourishing means, my conscientious self, and tapping into my true authentic self. And, as a Hindu, tapping into my dharma and living by code. That code, my personal code, not binary code, my code. So it's slowly helping me step into that, back into that. Thank you.
Yes, it's the culture. It's the authenticity of like our uniqueness, right? Each of us are unique, and we're here to more fully dive into that declaration of who am I at my essential essence, my core, recognizing where we're at, and like you just shared, like what is guiding me, my culture, my values, and keeping that firmly in mind, we can then navigate towards that direction as we cultivate these new essential skills.
I'm actually going to take this opportunity to thank you for, for in a very long time. And when we first met on Clubhouse, through connecting through books, through wisdom, through your sage presence, and that fellowship, that gift of fellowship really truly helped me orient, and we talked about orientation. And I remember at the time I had said that, you were my soul Sherpa, which is very much the case. I felt that. And I think that's really been for me, I'm so grateful for that fellowship because it's really helped me orient towards conscientious living. And, and as I remember in those rooms, I remember thinking and coming up with, well, DNA actually, for me, I think Maggie's like my soul Sherpa, and she's helping me tap into my divine natural ability. That's what DNA is for me. So, I'm so grateful to you, Maggie, and to you, Colin. Really, it's amazing. Thank you.
I love it. Urchin is the wordsmith. I just love how creative you are with language and new ways to look at it. It's so fun and makes this exploration of where we're going in life just spark with creativity and innovation. So thank you so much for reflecting on our beautiful way we met in Clubhouse. Woo, that was years ago. Just loving and sharing the amazing love of books that we have. So today we're talking about positive intelligence. Colin, what about you? How's that idea of SAGE, using the other parts of our brain, preventing them from atrophying as we look for what is this concept of human flourishing?
This work that Shirzad has done gave me a platform of from where I then went and started to learn about perspective flexibility. And you talk about it, looking at the situation from the perspective of the sage, which means that before we started to gain the sage perspective, we were looking at it from saboteur's perspectives. And so what we're shown here is what he's doing is very, very high level psychological and neurobiological shifting. Is he's given us archetypes to objectively assign a perspective, and then teaching us how to shift our perspectives. And in my own study, that is a really high level psychological practice, being able to consciously shift your perspective, because most people will use this phrase: oh, this is just who I am, this is just how I operate, this is just how I. Well, yeah, it is, because you won't change your mind. But really what it gets down to is many people can't. And that's the power of PQ, is he gives us training wheels to start to gain perspective flexibility. And perspective flexibility frees us from getting stuck in those sabotorial modes, and gives us options to say, oh, wow, how could the sage look at this? So in my opinion, see, I didn't even learn that stuff until after I got to the PQ, and then was expanding my own journey and realized, oh my gosh, PQ does this really, really powerful thing and gives people access to perspective flexibility without ever talking about it. It's brilliant.
I just, this is the third time now I'm reading this book. I think the first time I read it was 2024. And it's a quick read. It's only like 5.5 hours that I read it, but each time I pull something different that I'm learning from it. And it really dawned on me that without these inner skills, most behavioral changes that we've been trying to put into the workplace or working with our other groups online, these behavior changes are just not going to stick long term. Or even spending a lot of money on a lot of corporate training programs focusing on the techniques or the ideas. We might have, Shirzad talks about how most training programs lead people into a temporary state of kind of practicing with new techniques, and then you go home and 2 weeks later, you go back to your baseline, you go back to the way you've been doing things. So it's time to understand, take a new look, a refreshed look of how the habit loop is operating in this new age, where constant stress, constant uncertainty is kind of putting into us to showing up in a default mode of the brain. It's not us, that we don't have the information or the wisdom or the willpower. It's our environment and how our brain is set up to perceive and respond to what's happening. So people may know what to do. We all know what to do, right? But now it's time to recognize how we show up under stress. That the survival brain takes over, attention fragments, old habits return, and we're stuck in reactivity. So the deeper promise of this book, of mental fitness in general, is not to aim for perfection or to show up as the expert hierarchical leader. The times now are being called, from many of the books that we're looking at now, whether it's corporate leadership or how we like to frame it, self-leadership. It's about greater self-command, awareness, and then choosing to step into the driver's seat, right? That ability to pause is essential. That's why this group exists right here. Just to become aware of this moment and to make more intentional choices. So for us, we really do orient to looking at what gives us more energy, what gives us more capacity to focus on what matters most. And we've been talking about them here, right? It's not just, the financial, it's not just the career. It's things that really matter. One of the tools that he uses in the book is called the future, I forget what he actually calls it, future casting, just at the end of your life, looking back. How would you wish that you've acted in this moment? And that simple exercise, whether we're working on a workplace project, whether we're working on our health, whether we're facing a loss of some sort, a critical transition, these types of pause and reflection exercises can help us to focus on those aspects that perhaps might be oriented more towards our inner values, connected to what would truly navigate us towards our higher and better self. And these are often around health, relationships, the meaning and purpose we are bringing into our life and expressing through our contributions in our work, in our relationships and communities, and in general, around the quality of our lives. So this book is rich. It's about well-being, performance, and the quality of relationships and how we can show up to be among the 20% that can actually achieve our peak performance, our peak possibility of what we are here to do and share in the world. So highly encourage you to check out the book. So I think we're going to recap the big ideas. So as we begin wrapping up today, looking at the biggest takeaways, what's coming up for you guys and the big ideas that we looked at. Mental fitness really does matter as a part of our everyday mental hygiene. Number one, we looked at strengthening awareness. It begins with being aware of what's coming up in our thoughts and emotions first, and then building that capacity to pause as we work on emotional resilience. Building that emotional resilience by stepping in with courage to put ourselves into that driver's seat and to make those conscious choices. So by cultivating the intentional response, we begin to then orient to our values, to what matters most. And often it's these small daily practices. Once we begin to really repeat them consistently, they can gradually reshape how we actually think, how we initially perceive what's happening, the circumstance or other people, and how we can more powerfully choose to then step in and lead, or how we can relate to others and how we can show up more empowered, connected to what truly matters. So as we reflect on today's conversation around positive intelligence, I'd love for you to just reflect to yourself, whether you have your wellness journal or just a note nearby. Just reflect to yourself, what is that one small daily practice that helps you return to clarity, a sense of presence, or self-command? Because as we look at flourishing and our human potential, that rarely happens all at once. So giving ourselves that self-compassion and that pause, and acknowledge that flourishing happens through small, intentional choices, repeated consistently over time. Thank you all so much for being part of today's Cafecito Chat. Join us weekly for conversations on many topics around mental fitness, self-leadership, the idea of whole person well-being, human flourishing, as we look at what matters in culture, values, and meaning and purpose. Today with us, we had Archana and Colin. Please reach out and stay in touch. Reach us on myhealthpivot@gmail.com. And please share and invite others to our YouTube channel. Are you motivated to try and explore one new thing, or what stood out for you?
I think for myself, I am grateful to Shirzad for the gift of faith in humanity. That's, I mean, on a much bigger level, but at the same time, on a much personal level, for me, it's just like, you've got to have faith in humanity. And, it is identifying, as Colin mentioned earlier, identifying a perspective change, and shifting, and looking at the saboteurs and the judge as these storytellers, just these storytellers that have been telling the same old story over and over again. But the truth is, the story is really faith in humanity. At least that's what it comes down to for me. So what a gift, and really what a brilliant man, and just really gift of, and this incredible toolkit that we can really apply to our lives and achieve that self-command. So really grateful.
Thank you, Regina. What about you, Colin? What's staying with you from this discussion?
Well, I think one of the things that really helped me see the power of PQ, and not only PQ, but the intentional determination to do these practices. You said it in that last sentence, consistently over time. I once I started to meditate, I started trying to talk people into meditation. And most people are like, oh, my brain doesn't work that way. But really what it gets down to is it feels really hard to discipline the mind. Nobody wants to discipline the mind and just sit down and focus. The great thing about BQ is by moving it into an embodiment felt state, we can focus on that felt state and it doesn't feel so hard or heavy. But here's the kicker, and here's the one thing is that there are so many people who are willing to go to sporting events and watch people who have practiced every day for hours of day to develop a skill. And then they sit and think, I wonder why I can't focus my attention. I wonder why I can't stay calm in a intense, because we don't practice. Nobody's practicing consistently over time. And that's the great thing is even some people who do practice consistently over time, myself included, I practiced my meditation every morning, religiously, faithfully, getting up, sitting in my space, having that meditation. But inevitably, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm worn out, I'm run down, my gas tank's a little empty. Then all of a sudden, I'm snapping at my kids, or I'm thinking negative thoughts, or whatever. That's the power of this, in my opinion, Maggie, is you give somebody a tool, just like you said, Urchina, you give somebody a tool that says, we can do this anytime we want, and we can do it consistently over time, and it will change how you operate. It absolutely will change.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beauty of it also is what for me really is different this time as someone who is challenged by, meditation and or consistent practice rather. For me, what's different this time is that Shirzad, through his lived embodied experience, humility, humanity, is sharing a non-shaming way, personally, I find, where no judgments, no saboteurs. They're there. They're in the room. They are present. But, and you identify them and you name them and you disarm them. And then you start and you get back to doing work. And you get back to what matters. And then you're able to do it from a humble, understanding that these are the things that are, in the room with you, the big elephant, a couple of elephants in the room for some of us. And you go on and you strive, and I think that for me is really, really such a gift. And so beautiful. And something worth celebrating, and there's a calmness that comes with that. So yeah, I found that really, I find this, PQ to be an incredible, I don't know the words for it right now, but I'm struggling. But but it is
It's like
there's
a
something.
framework. Yeah.
It's a framework, and it's so many other things too. I think that's the reason I'm struggling, because it's not just a framework. It's that and more, right? And you talk about that, right? So it's a great thing. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for those shares. Urchin, I love what you said, about the non-judgmental. He does bring it in to say, he brings in the work from like Kristen Neff, who talks about the common humanity, that we're all imperfect. We're all chasing perfection to a certain degree, and then we're judging ourselves. So she says it's time to bring the focus on common humanity. We all have pain and challenges and struggle. And here's the kicker. For as we get higher and higher in our careers, in our responsibilities, we tend to then show up as an expert, like assuming that everybody expects us to have the answers and have the solutions. And so what is so great about this book is that it brings a timely interpretation of the universal problems that humanity have been having throughout the eons. But instead of like going back and looking at it from the Bhagavad Gita, which talks about a similar battle in our mind, and that may not land with modern readers or Western minds, right? So he brings the Eastern and Western methodologies of understanding humanity, how we work, how we're oriented and motivated, but he makes it in a digestible way. And as Colin said, it's about being real. Like, do we really expect to show up at the football stadium and be able to throw, a pass like the pros? Hello, it takes reps. So that's why they talk about the 10,000 steps if you want to, move the needle towards being healthier, right? Well, 10,000 steps may not be right for everyone. So it's about our uniqueness. How is your path looking? So being curious about your path. It may not be 10,000 steps. It might be 8,000, or if you're older, it might be 4,000 or 6,000, right? That's your right size method of practice. So whether you're a corporate athlete and you're here to show up as your best, or you're a community leader, or you're leading your household, you're the commander in chief of the household. In every responsibility, we have that option to put our hands on the reins of the horses that are leading us slowly off the cliff in the chaos of stress and uncertainty, and saying, whoa, horsies, I've got you. I'm now connected. I have some techniques, some direct, simple steps that I can take every day to keep my hand on the reins and begin to slowly direct the way my mind is moving forward. So all this and more in this amazing short little book, again, tied and connected to the programs that I'm leading. So if you'd like to learn more, please reach out. I'll put a QR code here to learn more information. So my friends, there's so much more to share in this, but we try to just share the big ideas in the book, some ideas you can put into practice. And of course, as we would love to share, end with is, how does this apply to you right now in your life? What's one small +1, we call it in our heroic community? What's 1+1 action step that you feel inspired to add to your life this week? Just one little habit that you were inspired from the talks today. Or what's one thing you'd like to take away, a -1, a habit, a reaction, or a pattern you might want to intercept in today's lifestyle. So we've come to the end of another amazing discussion on this book, Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine. Thank you all so much for being a part of today's Cafecito Chat. If you think conversations like this matter deeply right now, please like and subscribe, and invite others who might like to join these conversations and explore new books coming our way. If you've missed the earlier conversations from this month, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel to catch up on those highlights. And we'd love to invite you to join us next week as we continue our discussion on mental health with Conquest of Mind by Eknath Easwaran, one of my faves. And I think, Colin, you too, this is your guy. So we're looking forward to diving into this amazing book, and we hope that you'll join us next time, because together we create this really beautiful, powerful arc together around sharing our attention, our well-being, our mental fitness, and flourishing. Because here in Cafecito Chat, we reflect on books together that spark meaningful conversations that hopefully inspire us towards transformational ways to live. So until next time, take a moment to pause, not to stop, but to pivot toward what matters. Thanks for joining us. Until next time. Bye-bye.